My name is Clara, and I'm 29 years old. At my wedding rehearsal dinner, surrounded by everyone I thought I loved, my own father raised his glass for a toast and called me garbage. In front of my friends, my future in-laws, he said my life was a waste, a collection of broken things, an embarrassment to the family name. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, as the champagne fizzled smugly in his glass, was that my fiancé, the man they all saw as a jobless, daydreaming failure, was moments away from a phone call that would announce the closing of a deal worth over $1 billion. If you've ever been made to feel small by the very people who should have helped you grow, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And before I tell you how that one single phone call shattered their world and built mine, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding your worth when others try to strip it away. Before that fateful dinner, my life was a canvas painted in muted colors, a mix of quiet passion and persistent, low-grade heartache. I'm an artist, not the kind you see in glamorous, white-walled galleries, but the kind who works from a cramped corner of a small apartment, the smell of turpentine and oil paints clinging to my clothes like a second skin. My art is how I breathe. It's where I translate the chaos of the world into something that makes sense, where I can be bold and loud without ever saying a word. For years, my paintings, portraits, landscapes, custom commissions paid our bills. They paid the rent for our small apartment, bought the groceries, and kept the lights on while my fiancé, Alex, poured his soul into his own creation. Alex was a dreamer, a brilliant, self-taught coder who had been working tirelessly on a software project from our tiny, windowless spare room that we jokingly called the cave. To the outside world, and most pointedly to my family, he was a deadbeat with a hobby. They saw a man in a hoodie who spent his days staring at a screen, and they judged. They saw me, the artist, enabling his fantasy, and they judged me even more harshly. My relationship with my parents, Richard and Eleanor, had always been a masterpiece of conditional love. I was the responsible, quiet, artistic daughter, a puzzle they never quite knew how to solve. My younger brother, Mark, was the golden child, a perfect reflection of their own values. Mark was a consultant, a vague and impressive-sounding title that my parents loved to boast about at their country club gatherings. He drove a flashy German car they helped him lease and lived in a downtown condo whose mortgage payments they frequently subsidized. My parents saw him as the embodiment of their success, a walking, talking trophy of their ambition. Me? I was their quiet, persistent disappointment. I had turned down a full scholarship to a prestigious business school, a path they had meticulously planned for me to pursue a degree in fine arts. To them, this wasn't a choice of passion. It was a profound and personal act of rebellion, a slap in the face to everything they stood for. "Artists starve, Clara," my father had said, his voice dripping with a disdain so potent it could curdle milk. "Mark is building an empire. You're building a collection of dust-collecting canvases in a tiny apartment. It's a waste." The injustice wasn't just emotional, it was deeply, painfully financial. When I was 19, my grandmother, my mother's mother, a kind, gentle woman who always smelled of lavender and encouraged my drawings, left me $20,000 in her will. Her letter, which I still have, specified it was for my artistic education and worldly adventures. I had it all planned. A summer-long intensive painting program in Florence, Italy. It was the dream of a lifetime. 2 weeks before I was scheduled to leave, my parents sat me down in their formal living room, a space so sterile it felt like an operating theater. Mark's first business venture, an ill-conceived luxury sock subscription box, had failed spectacularly, leaving him with a mountain of debt. "He's just finding his footing," my mother explained, her voice a soft, manipulative purr. "This is a critical time for him. A small setback. That money from your grandmother. It would be better served helping your brother build something real, something with a future." They didn't ask. They informed me. They framed it as my sacred duty as a sister. Feeling cornered, and still tangled in the web of needing their approval, I relented. I signed the check over to Mark. He took the money, and within 6 months, it was gone lost on another harebrained scheme involving artisanal dog treats. He never thanked me, My parents never mentioned the money, or Florence, ever again. My dream of painting under the Tuscan sun dissolved, replaced by the bitter, metallic taste of knowing that my aspirations would always be considered secondary, a frivolous hobby next to my brother's real ambitions. When I met Alex, I felt a shift in the universe. He saw me, not the disappointing daughter or the responsible sister, but Clara, the artist. He loved my art, not as a cute hobby, but as a profession, as an extension of my soul. He would watch me paint for hours, his presence a comforting, solid silence in my chaotic world. He celebrated every small commission I received as if I'd won the lottery. He was my champion, my partner, the one person who saw my value without a price tag attached. But to my parents, Alex was just another one of my bad decisions, perhaps the worst one yet. He didn't come from money. He didn't have a corporate job with a clear trajectory. He wore hoodies, not suits. What is it that he does exactly? My father would ask at every family dinner, his tone making it abundantly clear he didn't care for the answer. He's building a platform that will revolutionize data security, I'd explain, my voice filled with a pride they refused to acknowledge. They would exchange a look, a silent, shared judgment that screamed, "He's unemployed and living off our daughter." They had no idea that my hobby was the very thing keeping a roof over our heads, while Alex poured every ounce of his brilliance into a project he believed would change the world. We lived frugally, but we were deliriously happy. Our small apartment was our sanctuary, a world away from the judgment and expectations of my family. I believed our love was strong enough to shield us from their disapproval. I truly thought our wedding would be the moment they would finally have to accept him, to accept us. I was so naive. I had no idea it would instead be the stage for my ultimate public humiliation. The catalyst was a simple, beautiful, profoundly intimate moment. On a rainy Tuesday evening, the kind where the city outside feels a million miles away, we were cleaning up after a simple dinner of pasta and cheap red wine. The air was filled with the soft sound of rain against the window pane and the melody of an old jazz record playing on a turntable Alex had fixed. In the middle of our living room, surrounded by stacks of books and my half-finished canvases, Alex suddenly got down on one knee. There was no crowd, no fancy photographer, just us and the soft, warm glow of a single lamp. His eyes, full of a love so sincere it made my heart ache, were locked on mine. The ring wasn't a massive diamond designed to impress. It was a delicate, vintage silver piece with a small, deep blue sapphire, my birthstone. He told me he'd bought it from a local artisan, a woman who made jewelry from reclaimed materials, after selling some of his old, treasured coding textbooks. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was perfect. It was us. The next day, floating on a cloud of pure joy, I called my parents to share the news. The phone rang 3 times before my mother picked up. "Hello, Mom! I have the most wonderful news!" I exclaimed, my voice bubbling over with excitement. "Alex and I are engaged!" The line was met with a chilling, echoing silence. For a full 5 seconds, all I could hear was the faint static of the connection. Finally, my mother spoke. "Oh," she said, the single word heavy with the weight of 1,000 unspoken criticisms. "Well, that's sudden." "We've been together for 4 years, Mom," I said, my cloud of joy beginning to dissipate, curdling into a familiar knot of defensiveness in my stomach. "It's not sudden at all." "Yes, well, is he financially stable now?" she pressed, cutting straight to what mattered to her. "Has his little computer game started making money yet?" "I just worry about you, Clara. A marriage is a serious financial commitment. It wasn't a game. It was a sophisticated, multi-layered encryption software. But I knew, after years of trying, that there was no point in explaining it again. "We're very happy, Mom," I said, my voice tight with the effort of holding back tears of frustration. That should be what matters. The official announcement to the family was even worse. We met at their house for the obligatory Sunday dinner. The air was thick, with a sense of formality and judgment. Mark was there, leaning against the kitchen counter, smirking as I held out my hand to show them the ring. "Cute," he said, barely glancing at it. "Did you buy that with your paint money, Clara? Hope you got a good deal." I felt Alex's hand find mine, a silent gesture of support. My father cleared his throat, the universal signal that he was about to make a pronouncement. "Clara, Alex," he began, his voice taking on the tone of a judge delivering a sentence. "While your mother and I wish you happiness, you must understand our very serious concerns. Marriage is a financial partnership. It's about building a legacy, securing a future. Alex, as of now, you have no job, no discernible income, and what appear to be no prospects. You are asking to take on responsibility for our daughter when you can't even seem to take care of yourself." "With all due respect, sir," Alex said, his voice a paradigm of calm and steadiness, a stark contrast to the hurricane of anger and hurt brewing inside me. "I am taking care of myself, and Clara and I take care of each other. My project is on the verge of a major breakthrough." My father let out a short, barking laugh, a sound that physically pained me. "Breakthrough? I've heard that song and dance before. Mark has breakthroughs every other week. The difference is, Mark has a tangible business, clients, a real-world presence. You, son, have a daydream." The rest of the dinner was a blur of backhanded compliments and thinly veiled insults, each one a small, sharp paper cut on my already wounded heart. They talked about the wedding not as a celebration of love, but as a financial liability, a social embarrassment they would have to endure. They lamented that it wouldn't be the grand, opulent affair they could have thrown for Mark. The event of our engagement, which should have been a joyful beginning, became the trigger for their war. It drew a line in the sand. From that moment on, my parents weren't just disapproving. They were actively, maliciously working to undermine our happiness, determined to prove to the world, and to me, that I had made a terrible, irreversible mistake. Their disapproval was just the opening act for the devastating storm that was about to break. The 6 months leading up to the wedding were a masterclass in psychological warfare, a slow, methodical dismantling of my joy. My parents' disapproval transformed from passive-aggressive comments into a full-blown campaign of sabotage, a series of calculated moves designed to remind me of my perceived low status and make me question my own choices. The first major battle was over the wedding dress. After weeks of searching, I had found it. A simple, elegant A-line gown at a small, independent boutique. It was made of a soft crepe fabric that flowed beautifully, with delicate lace cap sleeves. It was understated, classic, and the moment I saw myself in the mirror, I felt a sense of peace. I felt like myself. I excitedly sent a picture to my mother. Her reply came an hour later. "It's a bit plain, isn't it, dear? It looks like something you'd buy off the rack for a garden party, not your own wedding." She insisted on taking me to a high-end salon in the city's most expensive district, the kind of place where the air smells like money and every dress costs more than my car. She paraded me in front of the three-way mirrors, in enormous, jewel-encrusted ball gowns that weighed a ton. "Now, this is a wedding dress," she cooed, gesturing to a monstrosity of tulle and Swarovski crystals that made me look like a frosted cupcake. "This says you come from a respectable family with taste." When I gently reminded her that our budget was tight and that this wasn't my style, she waved her hand dismissively. "Don't worry about the cost. Consider it our wedding gift to you." I felt a dangerous flicker of hope, but it was quickly extinguished. "Of course," she added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We'd have to make some significant adjustments to the guest list. If we're paying for a dress like this, we can't have Alex's simple family making the place look tacky. They wouldn't be comfortable anyway." The message was crystal clear. Her financial support was a tool for control, a weapon to shape my wedding into her own social event, purging it of anyone who didn't fit her aesthetic. I politely but firmly declined and bought the simple dress I loved. My mother didn't speak to me for a week, a punishment of silence she had perfected throughout my childhood. Next came the venue. Alex and I had fallen in love with a restored 19th century barn on the outskirts of the city. It had high vaulted ceilings with exposed wooden beams, a huge stone fireplace, and was surrounded by rolling green hills. It was charming, intimate, and affordable. When I told my parents, Their reaction was one of pure horror. "A barn?" My father scoffed over the phone, his voice laced with incredulity. "Are you getting married or hosting a livestock auction?" "My God, Clara! What will people think?" Mark would never even consider something so common. They pushed relentlessly for us to have the reception at their country club. "We can get a member discount," my father offered, as if that were the main obstacle. "It's important to keep up appearances, Clara. The wedding is a reflection on the entire family. It was never about us. It was always about them. About the reflection we cast on their carefully constructed image of upper-middle-class perfection." The interference reached a fever pitch with the guest list. My parents presented us with a typed, alphabetized list of 50 of their own friends and business associates, none of whom I had seen in over a decade. "These are important people, Clara," my father insisted, tapping the paper with his finger. "It's good networking for Mark. You never know who he might meet." "It's my wedding, Dad, not my brother's business conference," I argued, my voice trembling with a frustration so deep it felt like it was vibrating in my bones. "This is exactly why you fail, Clara," he exploded, his face turning a blotchy red. "This right here. You have no ambition, no sense of strategy. You're content to play with your paints and marry some deadbeat with a laptop, while your brother is out there making connections and building a future. You're not just making a bad choice for yourself. You're actively dragging the family name through the mud." Throughout this emotional onslaught, Alex was my rock. He held me when I cried, listened to my rants, and calmly deflected my parents' endless attacks. His own parents, Sarah and Tom, her retired teacher and a librarian, were the complete opposite of mine. They welcomed me with open arms, their modest home filled with the comforting smell of old books and freshly baked bread. They were thrilled about the barn venue, loved my simple dress, and most importantly, they adored their son and trusted his judgment. One evening, after a particularly nasty phone call with my mother in which she'd called my artistic career a phase, I was sitting on the porch swing with Sarah, feeling utterly defeated. She listened patiently as I recounted the latest incident, her expression a mixture of sympathy and concern. "Clara, dear," she said, her voice full of a genuine kindness that I craved like water in a desert. "You are not the problem here. Please, you must hear me on this. You and Alex have built a beautiful, authentic life, based on love and mutual respect. Some people, like your parents, measure wealth in dollars and social standing. You two measure it in happiness, creativity, and support. Don't you ever let them convince you that your currency is worth less than theirs?" Her words were a balm to my raw, wounded spirit. Hearing someone else, an adult, a mother, validate my feelings, confirming that I wasn't being oversensitive or dramatic as my mother so often claimed, was a profound, life-altering relief. It was a moment of stark clarity. This wasn't just disapproval, it was a form of sustained emotional abuse. They were trying to break me down, to make me feel so small and worthless that I would abandon my own happiness and crawl back into the box they had built for me. I held on to the fragile, foolish hope that the rehearsal dinner, a night meant to be an intimate gathering of our closest family and friends, would finally bring us together. I thought that seeing us surrounded by people who loved us for who we were might soften their hearts. I couldn't have been more wrong. It didn't bring peace. It brought a reckoning. The rehearsal dinner was held in a private, candlelit room at a local Italian restaurant. It was supposed to be a small, cozy affair, just our parents, siblings, and the wedding party. A final, peaceful evening before the big day. Alex's parents had generously offered to host, a gesture my own parents had subtly mocked. "How quaint," my mother had remarked to my aunt on the phone, loud enough for me to overhear. "I suppose it's what they can afford." From the moment we arrived, the atmosphere was thick with a tension so palpable it felt like a third guest at every table. My parents were putting on a masterful performance, smiling cordially and making excruciatingly polite small talk, but their eyes were cold and hard as steel. Mark was in his element, holding court at his end of the table, loudly recounting a fabricated story about a seven-figure deal he was supposedly closing in Singapore, all while shooting condescending glances at Alex, who was quietly chatting with my maid of honor about her dog. I tried to ignore it. I focused on my friends, on Alex's warm and loving family. on the man I was going to marry tomorrow. I told myself, just get through tonight. Tomorrow, it will be over. Tomorrow, it will just be us. But the breaking point, the moment that would shatter everything, didn't come with a bang, but with the delicate, piercing clinking of a fork against a champagne glass. My father stood up, a smug, self-satisfied look on his face. "If I could have everyone's attention, please," he said, his voice booming through the small, intimate room. A hush fell. Every conversation stopped. I felt a familiar knot of dread tighten in my stomach, a cold premonition. We're all here to celebrate the union of my daughter Clara and Alex. He paused dramatically, letting Alex's name hang in the air as if it were a distasteful, foreign word he was forced to pronounce. "As a father," he continued, puffing out his chest, "you have certain dreams for your children. You dream they'll be successful, ambitious, a credit to the family name." He turned his gaze directly at Mark and beamed, a wide, proud smile. "And I'm proud to say that my son, Mark, has exceeded every one of those dreams. He is a leader, a businessman, a true success story." The room was uncomfortably silent. My maid of honor shifted in her seat. This was supposed to be about me and Alex. And then, my father continued, his gaze shifting to me, his smile vanishing, replaced by a look of profound disappointment. "You have other children." His eyes were like chips of ice, devoid of any warmth. Children who choose a different path, a path of hobbies, a path of struggle, a path that, frankly, brings nothing but shame and disappointment. I could feel every eye in the room on me, a mixture of pity and shock. Alex reached for my hand under the table, his grip a firm, reassuring anchor in a swirling sea of humiliation. "You know," my father said, taking a theatrical sip of his champagne, "when Clara was a little girl, she found a half-dead pigeon in the backyard and tried to nurse it back to health. She spent weeks building it a little nest out of twigs and her own doll blankets, feeding it scraps from the table. In the end, of course, the miserable thing died anyway." He chuckled, a cruel, hollow sound that echoed in the silent room. I remembered that pigeon. I had cried for 3 days. He looked right at me. "Some people are just drawn to broken things. They see potential where there is none. They collect garbage, thinking it's treasure." The room was utterly, deathly still. The word hung in the air, sharp, ugly, and irrevocable. Garbage. He had just called his own daughter, and the man she was about to marry, garbage in front of our closest friends and family. I saw a flash of shock on the faces of my friends, and pure, undisguised fury on the face of Alex's gentle father. My mother just sat there, a tight, approving smile plastered on her lips. It wasn't an off-the-cuff remark made under the influence of champagne. It was a calculated, public execution of my spirit, the culmination of a lifetime of disapproval. In that moment, something inside me broke. Not my spirit, but the lifelong, desperate, exhausting hope that I could ever earn their love or approval. The endless well of effort I had poured into seeking their validation ran completely dry. I looked at my father, this man whose validation I had craved for 29 years, and I felt nothing but a profound, liberating emptiness. The charade was over. He had finally said what he truly thought, and in doing so, he had, unintentionally, set me free. As my father sat down, basking in the stunned, horrified silence he had created, I felt Alex squeeze my hand under the table. I looked at him, my eyes swimming with tears of humiliation that I refused to let fall. I expected to see pure anger in his face, and it was there, simmering just below the surface, but it was overshadowed by something else, a calm, focused, and utterly chilling resolve. He had been so patient for so long, enduring the endless insults and the condescending dismissals, all for my sake. But this public execution of my worth, was a line that could not be uncrossed. What my parents, and everyone else in that room, didn't know was that Alex's daydream was not a fantasy. For the past 4 years, he hadn't just been coding in a dark room. He had been architecting one of the most advanced and impenetrable data encryption protocols the world had ever seen. He had essentially built an unpickable digital lock for the world's most sensitive information. He had bootstrapped the entire project himself, turning down multiple rounds of venture capital funding because he didn't want to lose control of his vision or compromise its integrity. He worked in secret. His only partners, a small, dedicated team of programmers scattered across the globe, communicating through encrypted channels. For the past 6 months, he had been in quiet, high-stakes negotiations with Omnicorp, one of the biggest and most powerful tech giants on the planet. They weren't just interested in investing. They wanted to acquire his entire company, Aegis Security, and integrate his protocol into their global network, securing everything from their cloud services to their financial transactions. The deal was monumental, the kind of acquisition that makes headlines in the Wall Street Journal and creates generational wealth overnight. And it was set to close any day now. We had kept it a secret for security reasons and, if I'm being honest, because it felt like our private victory, a world away from my parents' judgmental, materialistic gaze. I was the only person who truly knew the full extent of it. I had read the term sheets. I had sat in on late-night conference calls, translating complex legal jargon, and I had been the one to bring him coffee and encouragement at 3 a.m. when he was on the verge of giving up after hitting a critical bug. His success was my success. We had built this together, brick by digital brick. His secret weapon wasn't just the staggering amount of money. It was the truth. It was the irrefutable, undeniable proof that their entire judgment of him, and by extension, their judgment of me, was completely and spectacularly wrong. As my father's cruel words about garbage and broken things echoed in the silent room, Alex leaned over to me, his lips close to my ear, and whispered, "I'm done being quiet, Clara. Are you?" I looked into his eyes and saw the man who had believed in me when no one else did. The man who saw treasure where my own father saw trash. I nodded. A single, decisive movement. I'm done. The plan wasn't premeditated. It was forged in that moment of ultimate disrespect, a spontaneous act of righteous rebellion. Alex's phone, which he had placed face down on the table at the beginning of dinner, vibrated. A single, powerful buzz. He glanced at the screen, and I saw a name flash for a fraction of a second. The caller ID read Marcus Thorne, the legendary reclusive CEO of Omnicorp. This was it, the final call, the one that would change everything. He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. Now? I gave another slight, firm nod. Now. He didn't stand up and yell. He didn't cause a scene. He calmly picked up his phone, his movements slow and deliberate. "Excuse me, everyone," he said, his voice cutting through the thick, suffocating tension. "I have to take this. It's an important call I've been waiting for." My father scoffed, unable to resist one last dig. "Probably the pizza delivery boy wondering why you haven't paid him for last month's order." Mark snickered loudly. Alex ignored them. He tapped the screen to answer. And then he did something no one, least of all my father, expected. He pressed the speakerphone button. A crisp, authoritative, and instantly recognizable voice filled the room. "Alex? It's Marcus. Are you in a place where you can talk?" The sound of that name, Marcus Thorne, a titan of the tech industry, a man my father idolized and quoted in business meetings, was enough to make my brother Mark physically choke on his wine. My father's smirk faltered, his face clouding with confusion. "I am, Marcus," Alex said calmly, his voice as smooth as glass. "I'm here with my family. We're just finishing up a celebratory dinner." "Excellent." Marcus Thorne's voice boomed from the small speaker, rich with satisfaction. "Then let me be the first to congratulate you. The board has unanimously approved the acquisition. Welcome to Omnicorp, my friend. We've just wired the initial payment as a sign of good faith. The deal is done." Alex looked across the table, his eyes locking onto my father's. The trap had been set. The truth was about to be revealed, and their world was about to be turned upside down. The silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum broken only by the disembodied, powerful voice of Marcus Thorne speaking from the phone's small speaker. The final valuation came in higher than we anticipated after the last round of due diligence. the voice continued, completely oblivious to the emotional carnage unfolding in the small Italian restaurant. Your protocol is even more robust than we thought. Congratulations, Alex. The acquisition of Aegis Security for $1.2 billion is officially the largest private software deal in our company's history. $1.2 billion. The number dropped into the room like a physical object, a meteor striking the center of the table and vaporizing everything in its path. I watched, with a strange sense of detachment, as the color drained from my father's face. His jaw went slack, his mouth hanging slightly open, the champagne glass frozen halfway to his lips. My mother's hand flew to her pearl necklace, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and a dawning, frantic greed. Across the table, my brother Mark looked like he had been struck by lightning. His arrogant smirk had been wiped clean off his face, replaced by a slack-jawed, fish-like expression of pure, unadulterated shock. That's fantastic news, Marcus, Alex said, his voice a marvel of control, betraying no emotion whatsoever. Thank you for letting me know. I'll have my legal team connect with yours in the morning to finalize the press release and the transfer details. Of course, Marcus said. And Alex, do me a favor. Take your fiancé somewhere nice to celebrate. God knows you've both earned it after these last few years of working in the trenches. Talk soon. The line clicked off, plunging the room back into a deafening silence. Alex slowly placed his phone back on the table, the small black rectangle now feeling like an object of immense power. He didn't say a word. He just looked at my father, his gaze level and unwavering, and he waited. The air crackled with unspoken words, with years of resentment finally brought to the surface. It was my father who broke the silence, his voice a strangled, pathetic whisper. What? What in God's name was that? That, Alex said, his voice low and dangerous. Each word carefully chosen and delivered with pinpoint precision was my daydream, my little computer game, the waste of time you've spent the last 4 years mocking and belittling. My mother was the first to recover, her mind instantly, instinctively shifting to damage control and opportunism. $1 billion? She stammered, a frantic, greedy light entering her eyes as she looked at Alex, as if seeing him for the first time. Alex, my boy, we had no idea. Why didn't you tell us? We could have helped. Your father could have invested. Helped? I asked, finding my voice for the first time since the toast. It was quiet, but it sliced through the room like a shard of glass. Helped how, Mom? By telling him he was a failure? By insulting him at every family dinner? By trying to convince me to leave him? Now, Clara, don't be hysterical, my father blustered, his face a mottled red as he desperately tried to regain his footing, to rewrite the narrative. It was just a little tough love. A motivational tactic to push him. You called me garbage, I said, the words clear and cold as ice. You stood up in front of my friends and my future family, and you called me and the man I love garbage. He flinched as if I had physically slapped him. It was a joke. A poorly timed toast, that's all. You're being too sensitive. Was it a joke when you took my grandmother's inheritance, my art school money, to fund Mark's failed business? I pressed, the injustices of a decade pouring out of me in a calm, controlled torrent. Was it a joke when you tried to control every aspect of my wedding, from my dress to the guest list? Was it a joke, Dad, when you screamed at me that I was dragging the family name through the mud? He had no answer. He just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing uselessly. Mark, seeing his golden child status instantly evaporate and a new sun rising in the family solar system, scrambled to align himself with the new power center. Wow, Alex, man, that's incredible. I always knew you had it in you, he said, his voice slick with a false sincerity that was nauseating. We should totally talk business sometime. I've got some ideas that are perfect for a guy with your kind of capital. Alex just gave him a dead-eyed stare that could freeze fire. I don't do business with failures, Mark. And I certainly don't do business with people who watch their sister get publicly humiliated and do nothing but snicker. My father-in-law, to be Tom, a man of quiet dignity and few words, finally spoke. He stood up, his posture radiating an integrity that my own father so sorely lacked. He looked directly at Richard. For years, my wife and I have watched you and your wife treat Clara with nothing but casual cruelty and disdain. We kept our mouths shut out of respect for her wishes, but tonight, you crossed a line from which there is no return. You didn't just insult your daughter, you revealed the true poverty of your character, and it is ugly. Then, it was my turn. I stood up, feeling a strength I never knew I possessed, a calm that came from having nothing left to lose. I looked at my parents, not as their child seeking approval, but as an adult, an equal. The toast you gave tonight was a gift, I said, my voice steady and clear. It was the gift of clarity. You finally showed me that your love is not something I can ever earn, because it is entirely dependent on your own vanity. It's tied to money, status, and appearances, things I have never cared about. I took the delicate sapphire ring off my finger, held it for a moment, and then slowly, deliberately slid it back on, a symbolic act of recommitment, not just to Alex, but to myself and my own choices. Alex and I have been rich for years. Not in your way. We've been rich in love, in support, and in belief in one another. That is a fortune you will never understand and will never be able to touch. I turned to Alex. Let's go. We turned and walked out of that room, leaving behind the shattered pieces of my old life. We left them sitting there amidst the half-eaten pasta and the cheap wine Alex's parents had so lovingly chosen, their faces a tableau of shock, greed, and dawning regret. As the door closed behind us, I didn't feel sadness or anger. I felt the exhilarating, terrifying, and beautiful thrill of a completely blank canvas. The moment the restaurant door closed behind us, cutting off the suffocating silence and the stench of hypocrisy, it felt like I took my first real breath in 29 years. The cool night air was a shock to my system, sharp and clean and real. We didn't speak as we walked to the car, the city lights blurring around us. Alex simply wrapped his arm around me, pulling me close to his side. It wasn't a gesture of pity or consolation, but of absolute solidarity. We were a team. We had faced the dragon in its lair and walked out of the fire together, unscathed. When we got in the car, I expected him to drive us back to our cramped apartment, the place that had been our sanctuary and our prison. Instead, he turned in the opposite direction, heading toward the affluent, tree-lined suburbs, the kind of place my parents always wished I lived in, but for all the wrong reasons. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, hoarse from the emotion of the night. "Home," he said with a small, tired smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He pulled into the long driveway of a beautiful, modern house, all glass and clean lines and dark wood, nestled amongst tall, ancient oak trees. It was the kind of house I would have sketched in my dream journal, a perfect fusion of nature and architecture. "Alex, what is this?" I whispered, my mind struggling to catch up with the seismic shifts of the last hour. "I signed the papers last week," he explained, turning off the engine and facing me. "It was going to be a wedding surprise. The initial payment from Omnicorp came through yesterday. I wanted our new life to start in a new place. A place with no bad memories, no ghosts." We walked inside, and I was speechless. The house was mostly empty, the polished concrete floors echoing our footsteps. The main living room had a soaring 20-foot ceiling and a wall made entirely of glass that looked out onto a sprawling, moonlit backyard. In the very center of that vast, empty floor was a single object, a professional, grade, handcrafted wooden art easel, the kind I had only ever dreamed of owning, with a pristine, oversized canvas already mounted on it. My eyes filled with tears again, but this time, they were tears of overwhelming, heart-shattering gratitude. He hadn't just bought us a house. He had built me a home, a space where my art, my passion, my very soul was not just an afterthought, but the undisputed centerpiece. My phone, which I'd left in my purse, started buzzing frantically, an insistent, desperate vibration against my leg. I pulled it out. 17 missed calls. 10 from my mother. 7 from my father. Then, the text started flooding in, a waterfall of panic and hypocrisy. "Mom, Clara, please answer the phone. We need to talk. Your father didn't mean it. He was just emotional. Dad, this is a massive misunderstanding. Come back and we can discuss this like a rational family. Mom, Alex, we are so incredibly proud of you. We always knew you were special. Please have Clara call us immediately. The whiplash was so extreme it was almost laughable. I showed the screen to Alex. He took the phone from my hand, his expression unreadable. He held down the power button until the screen went black. No more, he said gently, but with a note of finality. Not tonight. Tonight is for us. That night, we slept on an air mattress on the floor of our new, empty home, wrapped in a single soft blanket from the trunk of his car. Through the glass wall, we could see the stars. It was the most peaceful, profound, and restorative sleep I had ever had. For the first time, I wasn't weighed down by the constant, exhausting, soul-crushing effort of trying to be good enough for my parents. I was just me. And for the first time, I truly believed that was enough. The next morning, I woke up to the sun streaming through the massive windows, painting streaks of gold across the floor, and a feeling of profound lightness. The life I had been fighting for wasn't a distant dream anymore. It was here. We were finally free from the long, cold shadow of their judgment, ready to start painting our own future on a fresh, clean, and beautifully expansive canvas. 10 months after that disastrous rehearsal dinner, my life was unrecognizable. The quiet, muted tones of my past had been replaced with a palette of vibrant, brilliant, and unapologetic color. Our new house was no longer empty. It was filled with light, laughter, the sound of music, and the constant, comforting scent of oil paint and linseed oil. The large, sun-drenched room that overlooked the garden was now my official studio, a creative sanctuary with canvases of all sizes leaning against the walls and sketches pinned everywhere. The freedom was intoxicating. I began painting with a boldness and scale I hadn't realized I was suppressing, creating large, expressive, abstract pieces that were a world away from the small, marketable commissions I used to rely on for rent money. 6 months ago, with Alex's full support and a solid business plan drafted by the best consultants money could buy, I opened my own gallery in the city's arts district. Clara's Canvas wasn't just a place to sell my own exploding portfolio of work. It was a nonprofit space dedicated to showcasing emerging local artists, the kind of raw, undiscovered talent that often gets overlooked by the established commercial art world. We offered grants, mentorship, and a platform. It was an instant, roaring success. The gallery became a vibrant hub for the city's creative community, and I found a deep, resonant sense of purpose in helping other artists find their voice, providing them with the belief and support that I had craved for so long. The first artist we featured, a young sculptor from a low-income neighborhood, just sold a piece to the city museum. That felt better than any sale of my own. Alex, meanwhile, thrived at Omnicorp. He wasn't just another acquired asset. He was revered. He was named the head of their new global security division, leading a massive team to integrate his Aegis protocol across their entire infrastructure. He was respected, admired, and finally recognized for the quiet genius I had always known he was. But the success never changed the core of him. He was still the same man who would come into my studio at the end of a long day, kiss my paint-smudged cheek, and tell me I was beautiful. Our wedding, when it finally happened 2 months after the dinner, was exactly what we had always wanted. A small, private ceremony at the rustic barn, surrounded by a handful of our truest friends and his wonderful, loving family. My vows were about partnership. His were about seeing treasure where others saw none. It was a celebration of love, not a display of wealth. My parents were not invited. As for my family, their meticulously curated world had imploded. The announcement of Alex's billion-dollar deal had sent shockwaves through their social circle, and the story of my father's infamous toast embellished and retold with relish by my maid of honor and other guests had inevitably leaked out. They became social pariahs, their carefully crafted image of the perfect, successful family shattered overnight. Friends stopped returning their calls. They were politely asked to resign from the board of their favorite charity. The real, karmic justice, however, came from a different source. Stripped of the reflected glory of Alex's success, and now under a microscope of public scrutiny, my brother Mark's fraudulent career began to completely unravel. His consulting firm was exposed as a sham, a front for a series of reckless, high-risk investments made with money he had borrowed against the equity of my parents' house. The seven-figure deals in Singapore were pure fiction. Faced with foreclosure and mounting legal fees from his furious creditors, my parents were forced to sell their large, ostentatious house and all its contents. They moved into a small, rented condo in a town an hour away, a fraction of the size of our new home. They were broke, both financially and socially. Their attempts to contact me became more desperate and pathetic. The angry, demanding voicemails slowly morphed into long, tearful pleas. My mother would leave rambling messages about family sticking together and how much they missed me. My father sent a stilted, formal email admitting he could have chosen his words more carefully that evening. They never truly apologized for their actions, only for the outcome that had left them on the outside, looking in on a life they desperately wanted a piece of. Mark, in an act of supreme audacity, showed up at my gallery one afternoon, looking thin and haggard, begging for a loan to get back on his feet. I looked him in the eye, and for the first time felt no anger, only a sad sort of pity. I politely but firmly refused. I had established a new, unbreakable boundary. I would not fund their lifestyle, nor would I allow them to use me to solve the problems they had created for themselves. I did, however, send them a single certified check, anonymously, through a lawyer. It was for the exact amount of my grandmother's inheritance, $20,000, plus a generous calculation for 20 years of inflation. It came with a simple, unsigned note. A debt has been paid. I never heard if they knew it was from me. And I didn't care. It wasn't for them. It was for me. It was the closing of a painful chapter, the final brushstroke on a painting I was ready to take down from the wall. Looking back now, standing in my sun-filled studio, I realized that my father's cruel, thoughtless words at that dinner were, in their own twisted way, a form of liberation. For my entire life, I had been painting within the lines they had drawn for me, subconsciously toning down my own colors, shrinking my canvases, and quieting my vision to avoid clashing with their rigid expectations. When he called me garbage, he wasn't just insulting me. He was handing me a permission slip to finally throw away their entire rulebook and create my own masterpiece, on my own terms, in my own time. The greatest lesson I learned through all of this had absolutely nothing to do with money. I learned that your worth is not a reflection in someone else's eyes, especially if their vision is clouded by their own insecurities, prejudices, and shallow values. True wealth is being seen, valued, and loved for exactly who you are, not for who someone else thinks you should be. Alex loved me when I was a struggling artist in a tiny apartment, and he loves me now as a successful gallery owner in a beautiful home. His love was never conditional on my success or my conformity. It was the solid ground beneath my feet, the constant, unwavering support that gave me the courage to finally reach for the sky. I learned that family isn't just about the blood you share. It's about the people who champion your dreams, who sit with you in the dark when you're full of doubt, and who hand you a bigger canvas when you're afraid to ask for it. It's about the people who see your potential even when you can't see it yourself. The ones who see treasure even when you feel like broken things. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family situation to find your own happiness? I would love to hear your story and how you found your own strength in the comments below. It's in sharing our stories that we realize we are not alone. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for more stories of overcoming and empowerment, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's not only okay, but necessary to choose your own canvas. Thank you for listening, and may you always, always have the courage to paint your life in the bold, brilliant, and beautiful colors you deserve.